Hey everyone, Nick Yuskevich back with another edition of The Option here with Daily Fantasy Winners. We've got week 2 of this daily fantasy season coming up. Going to give you my highest projected guy at each position, and then also one or maybe even two of my favorite value plays here at each position as well. This is for the main slate on DraftKings, like the day session essentially. I know I said last week I was going to incorporate FanDuel into this, and I would still like to do that somehow. But FanDuel's main slate is obviously like afternoon and evening as opposed to like the late morning afternoon wave, like how DraftKings has it set up. And all the slates are like, there's obviously some crossover in the slates, and but there are a lot of different games as part of the main slate as well. And so from a content standpoint and how many different games there are to go to and doing all the projections and going through all the depth charts, it just takes a ton of time. And just so for the sake of trying to get out the video on time and everything and everything like that, it's just a lot simpler to just go ahead and do the DraftKings main slate here with the content. But I'd be more than happy, just tweet at me at Nick Yuskevich, or you can ask on the Daily Fantasy Winners forum as well. For any questions in regards to FanDuel, I'll be happy to help you out with that. And so, or even like other DraftKings sites, that's like the night slate as well, and so on and so forth. I try to be better about getting back to people on certain times, because I know with college football starting up, a lot more people are starting to like ask like certain questions and everything. So anyways, so with that, let's move on into this slate. And so, so we're starting here at quarterback. My top projected guy here is Kyler Murray. It's not by much, but it is enough nevertheless to make him my highest projected guy. So Kyler Murray, he didn't really fully work out last week because Oklahoma just ran Florida Atlantic off the field. That was crazy. Might be a little bit of a regression for Florida Atlantic based upon how they did last year. That's a little bit to be determined, but yeah, Oklahoma just crushed them. I think FAU actually, in my opinion, I mean, I'm not at practice every day with FAU, but I think they started the wrong quarterback. Personally, I'm a little surprised DeAndre Johnson didn't start on that one, but we'll see what they do there. But anyways, we're talking about Oklahoma. So Kyler Murray, he only got to play a half of football, so that's really the only reason why he didn't work out last week. Otherwise, he would have had obviously a ton more points. This line for Oklahoma is -30, and now this is kind of borderline-ish. Where you could get into that same type of situation, whereas last week it was only 21 and it ended up being a blowout. So there is a little bit of risk with this. And I'm not even saying I love Kyler Murray this week just because there isn't, and none of these top quarterbacks actually I really love. Sure, I like them, and they all have great potential, obviously. I mean, they're all, like, for the most part, dual threat quarterbacks, and, they can put up big numbers projected for a lot of points and all that. But, so Kyler Murray is in a big spread game, obviously playing UCLA, who looked horrible last week against Cincinnati, ended up losing that game at home in Chip Kelly's debut at the program. Dwayne Haskins, Ohio State did cover that massive spread last week, but that was more because they scored a lot of points, obviously, and Oregon State put up some points on them and kind of kept that not close, but just kind of in the ballpark there for a little while. So it allowed Haskins to stay in the game longer, unlike Kyler Murray. And so Haskins ended up throwing 5 touchdown passes, which is not, going to be the most sustainable thing. And Haskins isn't, I don't think, quite as much of a dual threat guy as some people realize. He will take off and run and does run it, but he's not like what JT Barrett was in the previous years. Khalil Tate's another story. He's got a ton of upside, but that was weird that I'm a little afraid that Khalil Tate that maybe Kevin Sumlin's getting a little too cute with this one, or maybe the offensive coordinator is, in the sense that they're trying to make him be a little bit too much of a, they're trying to develop his passing game too much and make him throw from the pocket more than he should have to. I mean, it's really weird. They didn't run him very much against BYU, and so I'm a little worried about that. But I mean, obviously, still Khalil Tate has amazing upside if they do let him run. So anyways, there's a little cause, I have a slight caution toward all these top guys, but Kyler Murray is my highest projected guy. But the only reason why, the only thing to not like about Kyler Murray is that it's in a big spread game and that he may only play a half or 3/4 of a game. But if this is within 2 or 3 touchdowns, for most of the game, and, UCLA ends up barely covering or Oklahoma ends up barely covering, then Kyler Murray should play most of the game. It should be fine. And Kyler Murray is absolutely definitely a dual threat quarterback, even though he only carried 4 times for 23 yards. Again, Oklahoma scored just so fast on Florida Atlantic. He just didn't have that many opportunities to do very much throwing and running. So Anyways, he's my highest projected guy. But more getting into a couple of the value guys that I particularly like, and Adrian Martinez especially. So, because Nebraska did not play last week. They did. Their game got canceled against Akron. That screwed a lot of people over, to say the least. But in any case, I honestly, it's funny. Like, games do get canceled. Obviously, we've seen this, but it's usually that has to do with hurricanes and everything like that. And I don't know. I don't think the field was unplayable, but like, yeah, there was like a bad storm that moved through, and it seemed like it wasn't ending, I guess. And they just at some point said we don't want to play at 2 or 3 in the morning or something. I don't know, but that was odd. Usually, I've never really. It's very rare you see that with like Midwest games or just non like hurricane locations where cancellations come into play. So it happened with the Iowa State South Dakota State game as well. So so we don't have anything to go off of from this year. And Adrian Martinez is a freshman, but Adrian Martinez is the clear starter. He is not expected to split snaps. He's going to be in a competitive game with Colorado most likely here. It's a pretty high over/under of 65. Nebraska a slight favorite with the over or with being projected for 34.25 points. Nebraska's team total wise. The one thing we should keep in mind here also is that if you watched the Nebraska spring game, or if you know what Scott Frost does with his offense and everything like that, and you kind of get an idea of, or even just watch some highlights of Adrian Martinez, he is definitely a dual threat guy. There's going to be a lot of zone read, and he's going to be running a lot. And they're going up against Colorado defense that is, I'm going to go with average, is just to say, make it kind of a safe bet. They're kind of an average defense, so to speak. This should be a pretty high scoring game, I think, just also because Scott Frost is going to go up tempo, and Colorado with Montez should be decently up tempo as well. Not to the extent that Nebraska will, but they should be still decent up tempo. And so should be see a lot of possessions and everything like that. I'm not high on either defense, and so I think Martinez is going to be in the game the entire time, and he's going to be able to rack up a lot of fantasy points. And just because we have a lot of other good options at quarterback and a lot of star power names in general, I do think that Martinez will not be that highly owned. I'm sure some people will own him, but it won't be like incredibly high or anything to be worried about from a GPP ownership standpoint. Now, the other thing I want to point out here is Steven Montez, the other quarterback in this game from Colorado. Now, he had a monster game in their opening game against Colorado State. Colorado State's defense is in complete rebuild mode. Most of their team's in rebuild mode because they lost just like a ton of people from last year's squad. And so Montez had a field day, put up 40.92 fantasy points, just carved him up super efficient. I think he only had like 3 incomplete passes on the entire day. And so it was just a really good day for Montez. And so I think a lot of people probably will use Montez as a result, unfortunately. But the one thing I think you can do to potentially, if you want to in GPPs, because he is pretty good value here, I think at 8,500, and we're going up against a Nebraska defense that was really bad, really here the last couple of seasons, and it's still going to take Scott Frost. I think it'll take him a little while for him to rebuild this defense to even get it really more back to being average or decent, whatever you want to call it. Because Montez is projected to do as well. The one thing I think you can do to make a unique lineup here, most likely, is play both quarterbacks in this game, and because we got a close spread here, and see if we get the shootout and it goes to overtime, and then it even multiplies even more. And I mentioned this last week that's one thing you can do with the S-Flex position in terms of trying to really emphasize the upside of your lineup in the sense of getting the overtime game of having 2 guys or multiple guys in the same game when you get the multiple overtimes happening. And so anyways, Martinez and Montez, I think that would be a good game to try and go that route. So let's move on to running back here. And so my highest predicted guy definitely is Jonathan Taylor here. So why Jonathan Taylor over Rodney Anderson? Rodney Anderson obviously was amazing last week. That pick worked out, although I will be the first to admit we got a little bit lucky with that just because of his touchdowns, that he didn't even get that much work because they just ran up the score so quickly. It was crazy. And so, but the other thing also is we got a little bit away with it is that he actually split time with Trey Sermon more quickly than I was anticipating. And so we got away with it a little bit there. And so I am not it's not like I'm down on Rodney Anderson now all of a sudden. It's just a slight lowering in the projection of him, just a tiny bit, because Sermon came in pretty early into that game. Granted, Oklahoma was up pretty good early, but it wasn't the type of thing where, Rodney Anderson played every series for like the first 4 or 5 series, and then he just sat out. It was a little bit of split work for that first half, and then Anderson was done for the day. So just kind of pump the brakes slightly on him a little bit as we got another big spread here. with 30 points here going against UCLA. But Jonathan Taylor, though, you don't really have to worry about this when it comes to workload with Jonathan Taylor, and I'll show you what I mean here. This is Jonathan Taylor last year in 2017. This first game, he was a true freshman last year, and so this was a massive blowout, and Wisconsin was splitting the workload out of the gate in this one against Utah State. So I kind of throw that one away. But if you look at the rest of these games, many of these games were blowouts last year that Wisconsin played in. What was it? I actually should pull this up here. I think Wisconsin. It was the Indiana game, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Indiana was a blowout for sure. The BYU game was a blowout, and he's still getting 18 carries against BYU, and he still got like 29 carries against Indiana. And so there were a good chunk of these, quite frankly, were blowouts. Maryland was kind of a blowout as well. And so from the standpoint, Jonathan Taylor's always going to get the workload, and they're going up against a pretty bad New Mexico defense here. And Wisconsin is a big favorite, but I'm just not as worried about that with him in comparison to the other top guys. So Taylor is by far my number one projected running back this week. And obviously you can see a pretty big drop off here in price here as we go from like Taylor and Anderson, and then just drop all the way down. We're hitting just a couple 8K guys and then on into the 7K. So it's pretty obvious. And I would certainly play Taylor and wouldn't be worried about the blowout as much from him. And I'll just mention this as well. Wisconsin with but if you go back to like 2014, this happened so Wisconsin had James White and Melvin Gordon both on the same team in 2013, and they used both guys quite a bit. And then James White went on to the NFL after 2013, and then it was just Melvin Gordon in 2014. And it was the same thing in 2014. They ran Melvin Gordon a ton. And granted, Gary Anderson, that was his last year at Wisconsin in 2014, but they had no problem just using Melvin Gordon a ton. They blew out Nebraska, I remember, in a November game, and Melvin Gordon set the all-time rushing record in a game against, I think it was Nebraska, if I'm not mistaken. And then it was like the next week, Samaje Perine from Oklahoma actually broke it when they played Kansas. It was like the following week. It was crazy. But Melvin just ran all over Nebraska. It was like 400 yards rushing. It was something insane. And so Wisconsin's got a pretty good knack for that. I think they're going to try and give Taylor a lot of touches and kind of boost up his Heisman campaign. And so, as you see last week in a pretty decisive game, 18 carries, $145, 2 TDs, no biggie. And Taylor will get some PPR, I'm sure, here in this next contest. So, anyways, I just want to touch on Ohio State really quickly. You see why I was kind of not as high on Dobbins as in comparison to Rodney Anderson last week because of the potential of a big blowout, and then Mike Weber, obviously, he gets a fair amount of carries as well, and especially expecting a blowout. It's exactly what happened. So congrats to those who jumped on Mike Weber. Certainly kind of picking up that quote unquote backup role, I guess, a little bit, or 1B or right, or you knew Weber was going to play some, and so, but Weber ran especially hot with the touchdowns. Weber had 4 touchdowns, and it's not a common thing that Mike Weber gets more carries than J.K. Dobbins, and so this is a big spread game. But I will say that now that Dobbins' price is now down to 8,400, which is way more reasonable. And maybe even a little bit too cheap. This is a pretty decent price for J.K. Dobbins, who probably will get more likely in 15 to 20 carries again this week and get more of a workload than Mike Weber, unless it is just a massive blowout that maybe he will only get a dozen carries. It's not my favorite play. I just wanted to mention that this price is way more realistic, and it's probably on the cheap end. And the upside of Dobbins is huge if they do, even with Weber playing, the upside of Dobbins is huge if Rutgers is able to, because Ohio State's defense didn't look very good last week, and so Dobbins' touchdowns will certainly come if you get a little bit of a regression from Dwayne Haskins as well, because he had 5 passing touchdowns. That's not going to be as sustainable, and Dobbins is going to take some of those, obviously, over the long run. And so I don't know what his ownership will be. I'm going to guess some people will play Dobbins just because they're going to see that price drop. But again, predicting ownership here is a little bit tough in college football here in the early going, just because we've had a couple year absence of college football. The daily fantasy industry has kind of changed over the last few years, just in general, and just kind of figuring out which types of players are playing in this in terms of college football, and how smarter people have adapted. And we have a lot more people using models now, but it's hard to really use models in college football when we've got, there's so much turnover and everything. So it's just predicting ownership is a very tough thing to do. So I just wanted to point this out. Dobbins is not a bad play, and we're getting a better price here. Not my favorite, but still decent. The one guy I really do like, though, as far as a value play here goes, is Kervonte Benson, Georgia Tech. So if you don't know anything about Georgia Tech, they do run the triple option. Excuse me. Benson last week, they played Alcorn State. They crushed 140 something to 7, I believe. Benson is the main guy. He only got 10 carries, but that's because it was a blowout. It wasn't because there was something wrong with him. At least I don't think. They're in a much more competitive game now. Now they're playing South Florida. They're at South Florida, but Georgia Tech is a 3.5 point favorite, projected for 33 points, so pretty decent. And the one thing I will show you about Benson, if you're worried about, like, just if you're not looking at like last year's stats and you're just saying like, oh, Benson didn't get that much workload, I'm kind of unsure about this. I'll show you Kervonte Benson last year, this 2017 game log, just a huge workload in pretty much every single game. The Miami game, I'm pretty sure that was a blowout if I'm not mistaken. Let me pull this up, actually, just double check this. I think this was a blowout if I'm not mistaken. It was actually really close. That's really interesting. Maybe you got hurt in that one. So one game, I remember that game now. So yeah, there was one game, and then the Jacksonville State game, obviously that makes sense, a little bit of a blowout. But so excluding 2 games in there, he's obviously gotten a really good workload, and his upside's crazy, obviously. So if he's getting like, just under 20 carries a game, he's easily getting over 100 yards and 6 touchdowns. He ran a little bit bad in touchdowns last year. If you take a look at Georgia Tech's touchdowns rushing, Taquan Marshall, he's the quarterback, and the running triple option, the quarterback's going to get some rushing touchdowns. But this is a huge differential, 17-6. That's not that's not sustainable, especially when you got 2 guys that are clearly the 2 biggest runners on the team. These are going to be a little bit more evened out over the long run. So I think Benson is significantly underpriced here at 6K, and it's not like he had a huge day last week, and Georgia Tech's not like a huge, they're not like a huge brand name program right now and everything, and there's enough good running backs here, more expensive wise. I just don't think he's actually going to get much ownership and a lot of upside, and he's the number 1 back, and that's like a lot better because most of the guys around $6,000 here, you're talking about guys that are sharing the backfield with somebody else and roughly split carries, or if they're a bell cow like Alex Barnes, he's like the main bell cow for Kansas State, but they are a 9-point underdog at home against Mississippi State and only projected for 22.5 points. So this is by far the best situation of the value plays, and I don't think he's going to be that highly owned. So Benson's my favorite pick there. Moving on to wide receivers, Marquise Brown. This price, I don't get it. Marquise Brown's the best wide receiver. He's easily my highest projected wide receiver in this slate, and I don't know why he is the 3rd most expensive. It doesn't make sense to me. Don't know. So anyways, Brown, he had 6 catches for 133 yards in limited action, caught a touchdown. He went for over 1,000 yards last year. He's the next good Oklahoma receiver. A huge line of them. Obviously, with Oklahoma's offense and what Lincoln Riley is doing, one of the best offensive minds in the game. Brown's going to get a lot of numbers here, even if it is slightly limited action again this week. I mean, this was limited action, and that's. I mean, he's going to kill it this year. He'll go for he'll probably be about 1,300 yards receiving this year. And you're going against a UCLA team that goes up tempo with Chip Kelly, and they're struggling right now. So Oklahoma is going to get all the possessions in the world. Absolutely worth it in GPPs. Just pairing him up with Kyler Murray, and then putting in Benson as a cheaper running back to try and make the salary work and all that. So just wanted to mention Anthony Ratliff Williams. Easily the best receiver on North Carolina, and they've got a bunch of suspensions going on. They didn't look very good last week going against a Cal defense. That game was weird. I kind of just did not see that game playing out the way it did on both sides of the ball. But with Ratliff Williams, yeah. So North Carolina's playing at East Carolina as 16.5-point favorites and projected for 38.25 team points, which is obviously really good. East Carolina just lost to North Carolina A&T this last weekend, a mediocre FCS team. I think they're just mediocre, but really bad loss for East Carolina. They're terrible. Their coach Tyson Summers very much on the hot seat, according to a lot of people. And so this is a game that North Carolina should score a lot of points in it. And Ratliff Williams, I've got to fix that. And Anthony Ratliff Williams is by far the best receiver. And it's an easy play. And I don't think he'll garner a ton of ownership just because he didn't have like a monstrous week last week. And I think a lot more people are going to gravitate toward a little bit cheaper receiver. I think a lot of people doing college football daily fantasy have a tendency probably to go a little bit cheaper at receiver just because it's a lot easier to do that in comparison to other positions. So you sometimes get some value here with these more expensive wide receivers in terms of ownership as it pertains to that. So I think that'll be kind of the case here with Rylef Williams. And so just wanted to point that out. Last person, this would definitely be somebody to pair with Adrian Martinez for your GPPs as well. That's J.D. Spielman. So he is like, the number 2 wide receiver, I guess you'd call it, for Nebraska. As the number 1 guy, I guess, is Stanley Morgan Jr. But really, I think they're more 1A and 1B than what these salaries are saying. So if you pull up Nebraska's stats from last year, and we got it filtered by yardage here, obviously. So Stanley Morgan, 61 balls for 986 yards and 10 TDs. J.D. Spielman, 55 balls for 830 and 2 touchdowns. So Stanley Morgan, a little bit more of the deep threat, but he ran really well in touchdowns. I mean, 1/6 of his receptions were touchdowns. That's pretty crazy, and that's usually not going to be the most sustainable thing. And Spielman obviously should get some of those over the long run. And actually Spielman does run it a little bit here. As you can see, he had 10 rushing attempts a season ago. And actually, so Spielman actually had more overall touches than Morgan goes. And of course, we're talking about DraftKings here where we get full PPR. That's a better thing as well. And I don't think a ton of people are also, again, because Nebraska didn't play last week, I don't think a ton of people are going to use J.D. Spielman. That's going to help out his ownership as well. And he's paired around some guys like, he's paired around these Houston guys who had huge fantasy days last week. And then I'm sure like some people will end up using like, some Ohio State receivers, just because they're Ohio State. And then, there's some decent guys here in the 7K range and a couple of the guys I mentioned. So anyways, at the end of the day here, I just don't think a ton of people are going to use Spielman, and it's a nice GPP option. And especially if some people do end up deciding to go the Stanley Morgan route just because, for whatever reason, I guess. But Spielman makes the most sense to me on DraftKings, certainly. This is way too big of a price gap between these two. So anyways, that is it for this video. Again, you can always tweet me at Nicky Skevich for college football questions. Hit me up. You can ask me on the forum as well. Twitter's usually the better way as far as something more immediate, but I will get you on the forum if it's like, think of it this way. If it's game day, if it's Saturday or like late Friday night, then you should probably tweet at me at Nicky Skevich. But, if it's earlier in the week, Thursday, Friday, or, even earlier than that, then just, post it on the forum and I'll get back to you on there. And so about any of the games, mainly the main slate, but any of the games is just fine, of course, or anything college football related, quite frankly. So anyways, thanks for watching. I'm at Nicky Skevich on Twitter. DailyFantasyWinners is on Twitter at DFSnerd. And thanks again, as always, for the support to the YouTube channel. All right, good luck, everybody.